Now, Ghana is planning to restrict imports of 22 products, citing health concerns, the protection of local industries, and the need to address trade deficits. Critics fear corruption risks. Now, the move aligns with strategies adopted by other African nations. Recommendations include economic diversification, infrastructure investment, and corruption mitigation for sustainable growth. At this point, Paul Frimpong, a development economist and executive director, Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory, joins me to speak more on this. Thank you so much, Paul, for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, looking broadly at the term import restriction, it involves so many things and could also be limiting, or in its view, be limited. Now, what form of restriction is the Ghanaian government proposing, and how does it hope to achieve it?
Well, I think, first of all, I think all this conversation in the context of what the government is trying to achieve, and actually what Ghana has been trying to achieve for since our political independence, where the country is trying to build the industrialization base. And we all know that, as we see most of the developed countries, the economies that we look up to, industrialization has always been a part of their journey. And Africa, as we are now, there are a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion around how the countries on the continent will revamp their industrialization drive. And as we know, a core part of this is to actually leverage on the local laws that you have, regulations that you have, to be able to create that kind of industrialization that you're looking for. So in the case of Ghana, that's what the government is trying to do, that we have a regulation that allows us to build our local industries. And one of them, of course, is through import-related restrictions. And so for me, I think that's the context, and it's not out of the blue that the government is trying to restrict importation. I think it speaks and it's core to what the country has been trying to achieve for decades now, as we try to build our economy through industrialization. So for me, I think that's the fundamental thing that I have to mention. Again, for the government, I think they have various tools that they can use in this scenario. But of course, it's going to be based on the level of consultation that the government is going to have, in respect of all other stakeholders that must be involved in the process of this, restriction that the government is trying to do, whether it's going to do import restrictions, whether it's going to be quota, whether it's going to be increase in tariffs. In fact, in the recent budget by the government, there has already been an increase in tariffs, especially on some other some imports. And so this is going to be in addition to that kind of scenario the government is trying to push across. Again, you have a situation where the government can actually do what we call quota. So that can also be about restricting the quantity of imported goods into the country, of those affected imported goods. And then, of course, you have the complete ban or embargo, which is not new, and almost every advanced economy that we have in this world today might have one way or the other in their development journey impose restriction, total restriction on importation of certain products into their country. Again, we can also look at regulation in terms of standard, and now to even import or export certain things to Europe, in a way, the kind of requirement that you have to meet, it's almost like you're being restricted totally from exporting to those countries. So for me, it's in the interest of whatever the country is trying to achieve at a particular point in time that will inform the decision to implement such a policy.
Well, Paul, in implementing these, it's been said that this ban could give too much power to the Minister of Trade. Now, what specific measures can be implemented to mitigate the risks of corruption associated with the issuance of licenses to potential importers? Because a lot of people have also talked about the possibility of impunity by the handlers or the regulators. A lot of critics are skeptical about how this will be done without having to put a hang on those who have the quality to deliver in terms of import, export, or the quality of our products being produced locally.
I totally agree with that assertion that we must be extremely careful in the implementation of these regulations in terms of how we intend to issue the importing licenses. And this is based on historical situation where in the past, such measures are mostly led to corruption and corruption-related issues, because the issuing authority actually have too much autonomy and too much power on who to issue licenses, import licenses to, and therefore found itself in a situation where they have to actually accept, illegal means of trying to allow certain people to import. So for me, I think it's very important that that question is being raised now, and we have to hear from the government on how they intend to go about the implementation of the import restriction. If it is a complete ban or embargo, it's a totally different game altogether, because that one, it's a complete ban. There's a restriction, just like in other countries that has been the case, in Nigeria, for example. But if it's an import restriction, then of course we can be, and we have to worry about the issue about corruption. Because again, the minister that has the power whether to accept your application or to reject your application, that could lead to a critical situation in terms of corruption and corruption-related situation. Of course, as I said earlier, there are a lot of stakeholders that are going to be involved in these kind of conversations, and even the Association of Ghana Industry, the AGI, which is a very core part of this kind of consultative group or stakeholder group, have actually raised the same issue, that they are looking forward to hearing more from the government through the Minister of Trade on how this import restriction licensing regime is going to be implemented. Because based on a report which was, I think, 1962 or so report on similar issue, what came out was that there are incidents of corruption in that regime when it was a situation for import restriction licenses. So for me, I think it's very important that we get to hear from the government today as to how they want to engage the various stakeholders to ensure that we do not find ourselves in that situation that will even lead to even bad situation that we are. Because what we are talking about is very important. And for me, and for some of us have been advocates, that we have so many low-hanging fruits that we need to tackle as a country, that if we look within, we have the capacity as a country to produce locally and exchange or substitute for those imports. We can do it. But then again, we've not been able to be strict on our rules and regulations, on our laws. We're not able to implement the latter, and so we leave everything in hand. Of course, in such situation, people are going to be affected. There are some section of the Ghanaian economy that's going to be affected when you place restrictions or a ban. But there has to be an alternative. We have to put the interest of the economy first before any other interest. For me, I think it's a right step in the right direction, that we have to tackle some of the low-hanging fruit that has been eating most part of the Ghanaian economy. We look at even the situation on the currency that the government has to cover.
Yes, Paul. Paul, that's where we're going now, talking about the currency. Earlier on, you talked about the various areas that you think the government can or might go in terms of implementing these restrictions. But then, do you think it would be enough in stabilizing the country's currency, and would that also help in supporting the country's balance of payments?
Indeed, of course. I mean, that's what some of these restrictions, that's what they are targeted, of course. First, you're looking at building an import substitution industry. So you're trying to lower the country dependence on imports, which we know has been the bane for most countries on the continent, especially in Ghana, where in each year the government has to offer billions of dollars to import food-related, especially food-related products to the country, therefore putting a pressure on the local currency. Again, you talk about the trade deficit also widening, because your imports are almost always more than your export, which is also a negative, balances on your trade deficit, and also can even affect your credit worthiness as a country or the health of your economy. Again, even in the case of Ghana, investigations have seen that even some of the products that we are even importing are of low standards, so we cannot allow such to continue, which is putting the health risk of the people at risk in this case. So for me, I think these are all clear objectives that are achievable if we are able to implement this regulation to the latter. That at every point in time, as I said earlier, every advanced economy that we know have implemented, one of these kind of restriction in their economic journey. Again, we have to also look at, I said earlier, about the industrialization drive, what we are trying to achieve as a country, as an economy in the next few years, that we want to build industry, local industries. And the only way to do that is to make them competitive. And the only way to also make them competitive is through government using its own rules and regulations in an effective way to protect those local industries. And it has been done before. To pick an example like China, that we all know the story of China in recent years. We've all seen how successful the economy of China is and how now we are all admiring what the country is doing. We all know until recently, China had what we call a closed economy to the rest of the world. They were doing everything locally. To even have access to invest in China, the level of registration that you have to go through, but it is all in the interest of building the economy. And now we are all seeing examples. So for us, I think we must be wary. Of course, there will be challenges. There will be retaliatory actions from some of our development partners in terms of some of the retaliatory action that they will take. But of course, we have to brace ourselves for such confrontations and know that if we're able to implement some of these things to the latter, it's to the benefit of the entire economy.
All right, Paul Frimpong, Development Economist and Executive Director, Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory. Thank you so much for your contribution on the show.
Thank you for having me.